writer, spoken word artist, performer, as of recent, maths facilitator in the corporate, but mostly just writing and performing.
I am a spoken word poet, storyteller. I like to call myself the composer because one thing that I've really learned to do with my art is how to use different art forms stemming from poetry to create different things. So yeah, so I don't like to put myself in a sort of box, but predominantly I am a spoken word poet.
It's changed so much. I feel like 2 years ago, 3 years ago, when I heard mental health, it was a different conversation surrounding the topic. It was very much we need to talk about it, and then everyone started talking about it.
I think depression, something which is quite common. I think depression. I think it's something that perhaps all of us suffer from. So I don't feel like it's a niche or individual problem. It's something that kind of everybody has a level of mental health problems, or probably something different, but everyone has a level of mental health. I think friends, I think myself, I think university, I think being a creative, I think being able to express yourself, a bunch of things.
But now when I hear mental health, I see maybe not enough companies taking the next step, which is, okay, we're speaking about it now. Like we've kind of removed the taboo where it matters, or it's not as stigmatized as it once was. How do we facilitate mental health now? Like how do we sort of approach it in terms of healing? Like how do we progressively approach mental health? So now I see it as more of a progressive conversation than I used to. But in terms of mental health on its own, as an isolated thing, separate from how people are reacting to it lately, I think it's something that needs to be really, really unpicked to the core of it. Because as was mentioned earlier, everyone goes through mental health. It is a spectrum, it is a journey. Bad mental health days, good mental health days. You're so aware of when you're in a good mental space, and you're so aware of when you're in a bad mental space as well. So it's just being able to harbour certain feelings and approach other feelings a lot better. But I think it's good that the conversation now is a lot more progressive in terms of, okay, we're at this point now where we're talking about depression, we're talking about anxiety, we're talking about all of these things. How do we deal with them? Like, how do we sort of handle them? How do we compartmentalise them? How do we function whilst existing in these spaces, which I think is the most important thing.
Occasionally, maybe not dark and perhaps life-threatening as some, or as dark or as life-threatening as others may have, but like I said, I believe everybody has a level of mental health, and it's literally just a balance that sometimes we stray either side of as humans, and as life goes on, and it happens to me, has happened, it comes, it goes, but yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, man, third year, oof. I feel like third year came for everyone's neck. I hadn't really experienced it beforehand. Like, I wouldn't have said that I had gone through anxiety or depression or anything of the sort beforehand. And I'll, if I'm completely honest, I thought I was immune to it. I came from a background where if you feel anything, like mentally, what's the word? Your brain is not at rest. You pray out of it, and that was it. And with that in my mind, I thought I'll never experience it. I can always pray out of a situation. And then third year came, and everything hit the fan, pretty much. So I think it was a weird one because I didn't want to call it depression. I didn't want to call it anxiety. I didn't want to have those conversations. And I was also in a field of mental health. Like, I was still going to shows and performing about mental health. I was still facilitating expression workshops. I was still dealing with people with mental health day to day. But for the first part of third year, I was in complete denial. I was like, nah, not me. Like, it's not me. It can't. And because I had that mindset, I wasn't speaking to anyone about it. But worse, I wasn't confronting it myself. So I had really, really unhealthy coping mechanisms until I actually pinpointed it. And I was like, you know what, Sophia? You're going through depression, you're going through anxiety, this is what's going on. And then I sought the necessary help from that space. But I think being in that space for such a long period of time, such an intense period of time as well, where there's so much pressure when you're in third year, like, it's not just getting the grades, it's not just getting your dissertation done, it's also trying to think, okay, this is my last bit of uni, how do I balance this with the social life? It's also, okay, this is my last bit of uni, so how do I pattern for when I leave uni? Your head is so heavy,
wouldn't claim I'm any sort of knowledgeable expert or anything like that. I wouldn't even describe myself as an advocate of mental health. Like, the only thing that I'd portray myself as is an advocate of self-expression. And I feel like self-expression is something which really does tie in with mental health and people that suffer from it, because it's really an avenue for you to use and go down to really help yourself. But yeah, man, like there's always more knowledge to be gained, more to be known, especially if you want to help yourself and the people around you.
And I just had to find ways to mould out of that, basically, and sort of unlearn myself and relearn myself again, sink into what was really going on under my skin. But I think in doing that now, when I go into spaces, when I'm called into spaces to work with young people that struggle with expression, I was working with MTV recently, putting together their whole Mental Illness and Black History Month campaign for October, because they've decided to combine the two, which I think is a sick idea. When I'm called into that space now, I've got more knowledge on, not necessarily on depression and anxiety, but on how to feel out that space, on how to feel yourself out. So now when it comes to writing, when it comes to shows, when I'm working with corporates or community-based projects, my main aim is always just to sink people as far into themselves as I possibly can via my words. Like when I lead my workshops, my main aim is to make people as vulnerable as humanly possible, especially when it's an expression workshop, because when you do that, you learn about what goes on underneath your skin. When I say things like, someone in my uni who was close to people that were close to me committed suicide, the suicide rate in uni is going up. These people are going through depression, this is what's causing them to do. And when it's people they know, and when they're seeing how it tangibly affects people they know, they're with me in that conversation. They're like, oh my goodness, something needs to be done, so many young people are going through this, da-da-da-da-da-da. And then it just flips, and it's like, okay, they need to just get out of their own head, or they need to just pray out of this situation. And it's like there's a massive discrepancy naturally between the two mindsets, but they haven't been raised in a generation of understanding that your mental is something you should attend to.
I feel like we've done extremely well as a community of Africans or Afro-Caribbeans to get to where we are today, where there's a lot more talk around it, there's a lot more attention, there's a lot more care being taken around mental health than there was 10 years ago, when people were being called blick and you was getting teased in the playground and all that sort of stuff. Like, we've done extremely well. Maybe it's just us growing up more as kind of a generation. We've kind of grown up a lot and we've realised the effects of these things. And yeah, but I feel like there's still kind of there's still a lot of work that needs to be done within our generation. I feel like we're definitely heading in the right direction. It's never going to be perfect, but we're definitely heading in the right direction. And at the same time, there's the older generation who perhaps will struggle to learn these things as quickly as us, or pick up these things as quickly as us, because they're so maybe stuck in their ways, or maybe their mentalities so ingrained in them that this thing is just a myth, or it's just something which isn't real, or things like that. But I feel like we've done really well, and that's something I want to highlight, because a lot of the time when people talk about the black community and mental health, it's always negative, it's always, oh, we don't do enough, we don't do this, but we're trying. I see a lot of people trying, and that's something that I really admire about us. Like, we're really trying, because this is hundreds of years of not accepting, of it being a stigma and not talking, that we're trying to turn around in a couple of years. It's not going to work, it's going to take time. But I feel like we are trying, but there's so much more that we can do and need to carry on doing before we get to a point where everybody feels safer to talk about their feelings, because feelings are feelings. You can't change how people feel, you can't change how people react to things, but what we can do is change our reaction and how we help and support these people, and like I said, that's going to take time. So yeah, man, we'll get there eventually, I hope, I pray, but things are going in the right direction. It just needs to be perpetuated, it needs to be pushed on.
Because they've been raised in it, you keep going. Like, if you feel sad and you're going to work, you go to work and you get on with it. Because they're survivalists. And I think also my parents are first generation back in London, so they came from Gambia and Sierra Leone, and they've never had a moment to be able to pause and think, you know what, this might be depression, or this might be anxiety. They've had to keep going, they've had to ignore what they're feeling mentally for as long as they've known. So whilst I used to hold it against them, like, how can you not see that this is more than just getting out of your own head. Like, how can you not see that people are actually dying because of things that are going on inside their own head, demons they're fighting themselves? I don't get angry with them anymore because they've never known anything different. In 15 years from now, the conversation is probably going to be different. My kids are probably going to be trying to talk to me about something that I'm really, really going to struggle to get. But whilst our generation is a lot more open-minded, so those conversations probably will be a lot more nurturing and cohesive. Their generation didn't have the time to be like that because they didn't come from a generation of, let's listen to our kids' opinions, let's really understand what's going on in their head. They weren't raised like that. They were raised on respect values and hierarchies in families. So I'm not mad at them about it. When I do have the conversations with them about depression and anxiety, I can't lie, like it has become a bit of a bore because I'm saying the same thing over and over and over again. And they seem to only get it when it gets to a really, really dire point. One of my friends is running this thing where they bring in aunties and uncles into mental illness conversations just to make them understand what's going on, and she was like, it's like a 40 to 60 success to fail rate where 60% of them understand, like they're so with you in the conversations when you talk to them about the technicalities of the brain and what goes on. And then by the time they get to the end of the session, it's like, hey, but we pray out of this. Like I rebuke any stronghold against the mind, which of course, like the same way you pray against a physical illness, you pray against a mental illness, but you also treat physical illnesses. You treat them where you go to the doctor and you seek advice and you work inside that world of physical illness. And there's just, I don't know what doesn't click inside, like my parents had anyway, that the same effort should be put into dealing with mental illness because it is just as much a muscle and a powerful muscle at that, the most powerful muscle at that.
The gap is closing, small. It's closing, not as quickly or as effectively as we perhaps need at the moment, but it's slowly getting there. But I feel like especially in terms of that, where like I said, the old generation, they're slowly getting it, but really and truly in the grand scheme of things they're not. So we need to kind of see how we can perhaps teach them a little bit more and get them more involved. But at the same time, I'm someone that's would rather focus on the younger generation than the older generation, because like I said, it's decades of a mindset that's just really been ingrained, and that's harder to change than the mindset of a 12-year-old that's coming into secondary school. Do you know what I mean? So I'd rather, in terms of moving forward, in terms of helping ourselves as communities, focus on people who are a lot younger, people who are growing up in the environments that we have, and kind of using our experiences to teach them what things are really about, and how, like I said, how to express themselves in ways which are beneficial for them in the long term. And I'm someone, like I said, I believe in self-expression, so I'm always letting, to a certain extent, to a certain degree, I'm letting people know how I feel. When I'm on social media, I'm actually being as transparent as I can be. Sometimes you don't want to tell the world everything. That's the truth of it all. But like, if as someone who is in a position that I am, I try to be as open and as honest as possible, because I feel like when people look at you on social media as some sort of person of interest or whatever, they think that your life is made, they think this person's doing X, Y, Z, they're so happy, but it's not always the case. It's not always the case. There's things that people go through, it's just life. And even if it's not something I can talk about with friends, sometimes it's something that I can just let be known that it's happening to me as well. Do you know what I mean? Because you never know who that helps, but it's a process.
I think finding the root of why you're feeling how you're feeling is really, really, really important, because once you've found the root of it, you can sort of unlearn or relearn or whatever it is, but definitely go from that point. So for example, in university, in third year, I was crazy anxious. That anxiety was leading me into isolation. I couldn't conversate very well. I felt awkward. I would overshare in conversations all the time. Someone would ask me a question, I'd just tell them my whole life. And that comes from loneliness. Like, you do that when you're feeling lonely, which is from isolation, which is from that anxiety. And also with that, I didn't want to be around people because I thought that I projected this negative sort of aura. There were so many character traits that weren't like mine that were coming from this space of anxiety and depression. And it wasn't until I realised that, okay, this is all a byproduct, this is the nucleus, the anxiety is the nucleus of it. I started sort of removing things one by one. So I told myself, okay, Sophia, don't overshare. Like, you're able to have a conversation without telling them absolutely everything in your life. Like, you're an adult. Like, you've got the capability to do this. So I stopped doing that, or I tried to stop doing that. I became aware of it at the very least. A lot of my anxiety was rooted in the fact that my parents put loads and loads and loads of pressure on me in terms of graduating and going into a certain field that I knew that I was never going to go into. And I was really trying to keep up a facade to them. I was like, yeah, 100% politics, UN, I'll be in Gambia, I'll be there with the president. Like, this is all the lies that I was spewing to them, because I thought maybe it was a possibility as well, because I was scared about this whole poetry thing. And that got nipped in the bud when I finally turned around to them. Okay, it wasn't as dramatic as this. I didn't turn around and was like, I'm doing poetry. It wasn't even nearly as dramatic. It was actually really cowardly. I didn't say a thing until graduation about what I planned to do, and I was like, okay, guys, I'm gonna try this art thing for a period of time. And a wall definitely broke down after that as well. So I confronted a lot of the things that were sort of holding me in that depressive and anxious space. And again, like, dealing with anxiety and dealing with depression is so different, but they're also very, very subjective to the person. There's a kid that I'm working with now at the Roundhouse who's autistic, and the way that he goes through depression is, I've never seen anything like it. And I've worked with a lot of people with depression. The way that he channels his emotions, the way that he decides, the way that he chooses to communicate and work with other people is so different, because not only is he obviously going through depression, but he's autistic, so all of the channels in his brain are different. Like, they're waving at complete different what do things wave at? Frequency. Thank you. As like than they usually would.
One piece of advice that I kind of internalized that really helped me over the last few years is just to think of the last time where you like believed that you were truly happy, and try and surround yourself with as much of these things as possible, or sometimes not possible, as much of these things and people as possible. And that's something I believe that has helped me. When I was playing football day in, day out, and I wanted to be a footballer as a 16-year-old, I was happy. And as a 22-year-old now, I'm someone that plays football often because I know that that's my happy place. I enjoy playing football. I enjoy being active and doing sport. When I feel like a bit low, like all I want to do is go out and play football, because I know that will take my mind off everything, and all I'm going to want to do is focus on expressing myself through my feet and around my friends. There's the banter. There's a lot of things around it. So, do you know what I mean? Like, one, just like immersing yourself with the same people and the same things that you feel make you happy. For me, it's sport. It's sport, and maybe finding someone. Doesn't have to be a whole bunch of people. It can be one person, or someone, or something. It could be your diary. It could be your notepad on your phone. Just to like let things out, because I feel like when things are in your head, because they're thoughts, they're not structured, and sometimes you lose control of your thoughts and they manifest into other things. But when you actually put your thoughts into words, whether it's verbal when you're talking or having a conversation with someone, or you're writing it down, you start to then understand more about what you're feeling.
So I think it is highly subjective, but I think the root of when you are trying to bring someone out of that space is understanding what's brought them there in the first place, and working bit by bit by bit to unlearn that. And as you said earlier, sometimes it's not about doing the opposite of what they're going through. Sometimes it's not, okay, I'm oversharing now, so I'm going to make sure I don't overshare. Sometimes it's not that. Sometimes it's, okay, I'm oversharing because I need to talk to someone. The opposite isn't like I need to not talk. The opposite, I need to find a therapist, or I need to find someone who's able to talk me through my problems. But that comes down to, of course, it being very subjective to the individual themselves.
Like I said, there's things that I try that won't work for other people, but yeah, the most I can do is give you what I do, and if it helps and it works for you, then it does. If it doesn't, then there's, do you know what I mean? Like, for like one thing that I'd say might work for everyone is really being able to vocalize what your thoughts are and learn more about yourself as a person, and what your triggers are as well. And if you recognize and can identify your triggers, then you can try and stay as far away from them as possible. Like I said, it's not always possible, but you can try.
Just sink inside your own skin, really really try to understand yourself.
I can't speak for nobody. I can't say, yeah, you're romanticizing it, but I'm very sure that there are people who use this whole mental health thing as perhaps like a way to get into certain sort of crowds, because it's something that needs to be talked about though regardless. So it's a tough one for me to turn around and kind of say negative things about, because these are conversations that need to be had, but at the same time it's really hard to tell who's serious and who's not. That's why when people talk about it, I'd rather have conversations that lead to something, or conversations that have a meaning, and like, what can we take from these conversations? Because a lot of conversations that I do see and hear have like very surface deep, and it's like, yeah, we're talking about it, but then what is actually the plan of action? Do you know what I mean? In terms of when people are speaking about it on like a public level, obviously personally it's cool to just talk, but if you're trying to bring mental health into any sort of limelight, or mental illness into any sort of limelight, I feel like the best way to do it surface is by not just talking surface deep, but really delving into things, if possible, and finding what a solution, even if it's short term, just finding a solution, something that will help, rather than just talking about it. I feel like that will go a longer way.
I think mental illness programs as a whole, and especially SAIE that is aimed at African and Caribbean diaspora, should be in schools as young as possible. This, as I said, the same way we're taught about the biology of our bodies, we need to be talking about the anatomy of our brain, because then you have that understanding. You're aware of how to self-help if you need to, or at least seek help when necessary, the same way you are when you're going through some kind of physical illness. So I think grassrooting is the most important thing, starting as young as possible to transform the mindset. And once teachers and the older generations see how it's impacting the young people, and seeing how they're learning to express themselves differently and more productively, the older generation will start getting it. They'll start understanding how important it is, especially in this generation where mental illness rates are sky high and they're still rocketing. So I think starting as young as possible. I'm a bit sceptical of the older generation as a whole in terms of changing their mindset, which is why I say start young, and if we can't help the older generation, at least we've sown a seed into the younger generation that will bear good fruit in time to come.